I'm going to start with the first question. What we've been seeing over the past 3 months has been labeled by many in the West as the Israel Hamas war. How does describing the current Israeli aggression in this way rob victims of justice, in your opinion?
Well, thank you, Adam. The whole framing of Israel Hamas and Israel Gaza is totally wrong and should not be accepted any longer. This is not a war to start with. This is a series of war crimes that Israel is committing against 2.3 million Palestinian civilians living in an open air prison of 365 square kilometers. 70% refugees, 50% children. Those were deprived from the basic human needs for the past 16 years because of the Israeli siege that left them with no other hope. So, what we have been witnessing for the past 3 months, 100 days today, is basically a continuation of the Israeli settler colonial project that had started 76 years ago. Gaza alone had endured four wars in the past 16 years, and this is the fifth. So what we have been witnessing is basically a reflection of 76 years of the Palestinian struggle for freedom, the Palestinian struggle and the endurances of injustices under the killings, the detentions, the confiscations of lands, the settlements, and the settler terrorism that we have been witnessing, backed by the Israeli military occupation. So, this prolonged military occupation uh, is is basically trying to implement a settler colonial project to forcibly evict the Palestinians, to empty the land, and to turn the Palestinians into minorities as a translation in what came in the Balfour Declaration in 1917, hoping to transform the Palestinian population into the minorities that only can enjoy some religious rights here and there, but basically to deprive the Palestinians from any right to self determination. This is a war against the Palestinian right of self determination. This is a war against every Palestinian. What we have endured in the West Bank in the past 3 months is not less. I mean, we have more than 350 martyrs in the West Bank on daily basis, from Nablus to Jenin to Tulkarem to Qalqilia to Jericho to Bethlehem to Hebron to Ramallah. We have daily invasions, daily raids, daily killings, and the number of checkpoints they had intensified in an unprecedented manner. The number of arrests, we have more than 8,000 Palestinian prisoners today behind the Israeli bars. So Israel is waging this apartheid system of settler colonialism, of deprivation of basic rights, of a continued racist military occupation policies against every Palestinian in the Gaza Strip, in the West Bank, and East Jerusalem equally. This is against the Palestinian right to self determination. This is not an Israel Hamas war.
Hmm. I mean, just to stick to the idea of kind of linguistics and language, what does self defense actually mean in practice? And does Israel have this right?
Um, if we want to take self defense from a legal point of view, and in respect to Article 51 of the United Nations Charter and Article 31 of the Rome Statute, yes, every state and every people should be enjoying the right to self defense. However, the right for Israel to defend itself does not mean that the Palestinians don't enjoy the right to self defense. The Palestinians equally enjoy their right to self defense. And to add to it, the right to resist the occupation and the right for self determination. Those are embedded rights under the international system of laws. But unfortunately, in our biased world, the world of double standards, violence of the weak is labeled as terror, while violence of the strong is labeled as war against terror. And I think this is our main problem in uh, dealing with the different labels or terminology when it comes to international law and how we apply it when the party is weak versus strong.
I've got to tell you that I grew up under apartheid in South Africa. So my first 20 years were living and from the age of 15 struggling against that. And I was immensely proud um, over the last week. And I want to know what you think about the legal efforts by South Africa and by governments or private legal groups to try Israel for genocide in Gaza. Do you think that these could be and are effective?
Um, Adam, I also want to share with you my personal and national, on the individual and collective level of the Palestinians, the level of pride, the level of hope, and the level of confidence in a better tomorrow that we lived in on the weekend, as we saw the South African team, present the case on behalf of the Palestinians who are suffering in Gaza. It was really morally uplifting, and it really gave us hope. Well, legally speaking and diplomatically speaking, I want to share with you and say it loudly that what South Africa managed to do is, while the international superpowers are resorting to fire and rockets and missiles in Yemen, in the Red Sea, or in Gaza, South Africa dragged those superpowers, including Israel, the occupying power, back to the international legal tools. So South Africa presented itself as the civilized, peaceful, legal, uncontested, and contemporary state of the world. And this is something that we should not undermine, honestly speaking. The South Africans managed to remind the world of the legal tools and the diplomatic tools, while Israel and the US and like-minded countries are still resorting to violence and to rockets and to shelling. So it gives a lot of hope, and it reminds us of the importance of the use of legal tools and diplomatic tools, and in hopes that humanity and justice will prevail. The South
Mhm.
African team did a brilliant job, uh, not only emotionally, because to see the South Africans, present the case had an emotional aspect to it. Yet their legal arguments and their preparation and the caliber of the team, it gave me so much pride in the South African. So I can just imagine
Absolutely.
what a South
Yeah.
African would be feeling today. Their
Mhm.
respect and their dedication and devotion to justice, to human rights, to law, to be equally applied to everyone, was just heartwarming and morally uplifting for a better tomorrow.
Totally. And it made the Israeli defense look so sloppy and so and the lies were so evident, you know. So I really agree with you. Aside from supporting submissions to the ICC and the ICJ, what else can countries do to apply pressure on Israel to end this genocide?
Well, Adam, in the past 3 months alone, Israel had violated so many articles under the international humanitarian law, the UN Charter, the four Geneva Conventions, the Convention of the Child, so many international conventions. Let's take, for example, the forced evictions orders or the forced displacements orders. Those are illegal under Article 49 of the four Geneva Conventions. And there is an obligation on every member state abiding by Article 146 to not only try and sue the criminals, but also to hold them accountable in their own local courts. So, besides taking the criminals to the ICJ as a state and then to the ICC as individuals, every member state of the UN has an individual and a collective responsibility. And here I want to elaborate. On the multilateral diplomacy level, I mean, it is disappointing because we saw how diplomacy had failed the humanity in Gaza in the past 100 days. And the diplomatic tools did really fail the humanity. Yet, it is also our moral obligation to remind those member states of their legal obligations under the UN Charter and under every other convention. The diplomatic ties, they could easily, they don't have to fully cut the diplomatic ties, but they can freeze them, They can do some economic boycotts, like we saw in the Ukraine Russia example last year. I mean, the numbers of sanctions which were imposed on Russia in less than 1 month were never imposed on Israel in 76 years, not any of them. So when we speak
Hmm.
about sanctions, when we speak about settlements, I mean, it is not contested that settlements are viewed as the main obstacle to any peaceful prospects in the horizons. And that settler violence had turned today into settler terrorism, which is being, targeting every Palestinian on daily base. You know, the farmers, the people who commute. So every Palestinian would have to think 10 times before, taking the decision to move between Palestinian cities or villages. So those countries can easily, and abiding by UN Security Council Resolution 2334, they can uh, stop the commerce and trade relations with Israel, let alone the settlements, the settlement products. You know, they could ban their own companies and business people who operate and cooperate with the settlements directly to stop those operations and trade relations. They could easily suspend or freeze their free trade agreements with Israel. They could do some amendments on the visa or wavering, entry conditions for the Israelis and the settlers. Not only to speak about the settlers, but also the Israelis. And one important and interesting fact that we should be focusing on is the foreign citizens who are residents of settlements. Yes, there are many Europeans and Westerns who reside on settlements. There is no question that this is illegal. So they should basically revoke their citizenship, the original citizenship, or just forcibly evict them from the settlements, because the settlements themselves are illegal and they should be dismantled. So those countries have many things to do on the bilateral level when it comes to the economic sanctions or the dealings with the settlements or the dealings with their own commerce and trade business people or their own citizens who are working or serving or just residing
Hmm.
on settlements.
Hmm.
Multilaterally speaking, they need to be reminded of their legal and moral obligations of ensuring the protections of civilians, of ensuring that the humanitarian aid goes in. The international community's role is not supposed to be begging Netanyahu to allow aid into Gaza or to facilitate the aid into Gaza. Their obligation is to protect the civilians and is to provide the supplements and the aid immediately. The fact that they are begging Netanyahu is totally wrong. It's totally not abiding with the diplomatic or the UN Charter kind of rules, to say the least.
I mean, totally. There was no moral awakening in South Africa in the 80s. It was literally thanks to sanctions. I mean, the government, the National Party was absolutely broke. So they had no recourse, they had no possibility other than to enter into negotiations and aim for an end to apartheid. Um, Saying that South Africa was expelled from the UN in 74 and with the sanctions made it a pariah state in the world. And this was the main motivation, as I said, to the coming of the end of apartheid. You've kind of answered this, but is this a realistic option for Israel, given what we're seeing now, like German unconditional support, America's unconditional support for the state of Israel?
Given our world of double standards and given the extreme Western bias in their support of the Israeli war crimes, whether they're military support, financial support, strategic support, uh, I'll be honest and maybe say, realistically speaking, and abiding by realpolitik, I don't know if this is feasible right now. However, I wouldn't abandon any tool. I wouldn't abandon any option. And I would encourage taking every path possible to make sure that justice will prevail and that criminals are held accountable.
Mm,
Those who fear the courts should not be committing crimes. It's as simple as that. If Israel and Netanyahu and the war criminals and the extreme right ministers in the cabinet are fearful of the courts, then they should just simply cease fire and stop their war crimes against the Palestinian people. Speaking about apartheid, I would also like to mention um, um, another layer of the sufferings of the Palestinians and how some sanctions and how some boycotts should or could help the case of justice. This is something that is not very much known to the world. You know, in Israel, besides the 8,000 prisoners who are held in the Israeli prisons, Israel still withholds 140 bodies of Palestinian martyrs. Palestinian martyrs, including my cousin Ahmed Ariqat, who was murdered 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago, and his body is still withheld. The fact that should go viral is that those bodies are mostly kept in the refrigerators of universities in Israel. You know, while academic institutions, while higher education institutions are supposed to be the homes for production of knowledge and the homes for production of global solutions to the challenges that we face today, unfortunately, the Israeli, uh, most reputable, by the way, and most famous universities that engage and enjoy uh, nice collaborations with universities around the world are the ones who are hosting those refrigerators in their labs. A boycott to those universities should not be questioned. You know, it should be just civilized, legal, and peaceful. The fact that the world is tolerating such criminal acts by Israel and criminal acts by the government and by the universities and by the police and by the settlers and by the individuals who are all armed and weaponized against the Palestinian people should not be tolerated in 2024.
mm. So, just continuing that logic, we could say that all the allies would be or could be considered complicit in this genocide, right?
Well, to have seen many Western countries taking sides is not to start with an example of leadership. It's not an example of strategic leadership to take sides as thousands of people, souls are perishing, as more than 10,000 children were murdered in Gaza. So this is on one hand really difficult to absorb in 2024 that world leaders are taking sides while civilians and children are dying, and on the other hand, the level of complicity in supporting those war crimes. So it is really inhumane to just accept to watch and to tolerate that Israel is committing those war crimes against the Palestinian civilians. And on the other hand, the fact that some countries are complicit not only in avoiding to hold those criminals accountable, but in supporting them and providing every aid possible. You know, the millions of dollars or euros, the military aid, the machinery, the strategic aid, the intelligence aid, and the moral aid. It is it is really difficult to comprehend in 2024 for those who still speak about democracy and about human rights and about prosperity. Uh, it's really very controversial that very civilized statements would come, for example, from the Biden administration, who are back to the same civilized rhetoric of the two-state solution and of equal measures, prosperity, peace, and dignity to the two people. While on the ground, all we see is blunt complicity, where their military aid to Israel had mounted from $3.8 billion annually to more than $14.3 billion in the past 3 months. This is just the financial aid to the Israeli military that commits every crime possible against the Palestinian people. uh, Western bias and Western complicity um, in the Israeli genocide against the Palestinian people is is just wrong, and those leaders should be reconsidering that they are standing on the wrong side of history.
Got you. This isn't just Netanyahu's war. So, and when we look at the ICJ, they're arguing for it as a dispute between countries, while the ICC is charging against individuals. So, who are we coming for in the ICC?
Well, of course, Netanyahu and all the other military commanders. Uh, and when we speak about the ICC, we're not only focused on the Gaza genocide. Let's be clear. There are other cases that could be referred to the ICC and which were already referred to the ICC. You know, the murder of Shireen Abu Akleh, the famous journalist. I mean, the commander who took the decision to murder Shireen at that point should be held accountable. The commander who took the decision to shoot and kill my cousin on the checkpoint between Abu Dis and Beit Lahem also should be held accountable. So this is a responsibility on individuals that took decisions deliberately in um, in um, in hopes to just terminate the lives of the Palestinians. We have seen many military commanders in the Israeli system uh, being very vocal and very, they bragged about their brutality. They were proudly, issuing statements about their, I mean, cruelty and violence and terror acts against the Palestinians, because simply they didn't see in Palestinians as human beings to start with, with their own words. So I think many individuals will be charged, and the
Hmm.
Palestinians have learned their lessons in documenting those crimes, whether it's crimes against the humanity or the targeting of humanitarian premises, or residential buildings, hospitals, mosques, churches, or the deprivation of basic rights, or the deprivation of the basic needs of water, electricity, fuel, or medicine. And I want to add internet and wi-fi services, Adam, because in 2024, if we go back to the Maslow pyramid of human needs, no one can deny that to enjoy 5G services, for example, is a basic human need that is hard to just abandon for any individual, no matter where, no matter what. So for the Palestinians to be deprived from this very minimal human need of the 21st century, where we don't enjoy more than 3G services in the West Bank and in Gaza, in the best case scenarios, they could enjoy 2G services. And of course, the Israeli military system could easily just take the decision to shut down all the communication systems in Gaza, let alone the Wi-Fi services, but also any communication kind of tools.
Hmm. I spend a lot of time working in Hebron um, with a remarkable human rights defender called Isa Amro, and I'm in touch with him daily. So I'm aware of how the situation for him has become more chronic and more punitive, and more frightening than ever he's experienced in his 40 years. Um, but do you see the possibility of the situation expanding into the West Bank at the level we're seeing in Gaza?
Well, Isa Amro is a good friend of mine, and really, I'm very proud of his resilience and of his steadfastness and his determination to
Mm,
continue to stay vocal for human rights, and his activism against settlers specifically. Because what he endures, and what the people in Palestine endure in Hebron specifically, is really sensitive, and it's a unique case where on daily basis they have settlers who attack them and who hit, and they use their arms, and they try to forcibly evict the Palestinians in Hebron, not only by the military orders that is sent to their homes, but also with the help of the settler terrorism that is taking place on daily base, and the more confiscations of lands on daily base. So he and his teams have all my respect, um, for their continued efforts to stay vocal and to try to export this image of the brutality and the terrorism of the settlers and the Israelis against every Palestinian, but specifically in the south and in Hebron. Um, it is interesting in the past year that we had witnessed settler terrorism not only in the south. We had witnessed blunt settler terrorism in Huwara, which is close to Nablus in the north. We had also witnessed it in Turmusaya around Ramallah, in Sinjal, in many different suburbs or villages in the middle of the West Bank. Many cases were documented, to the point where the EU External Political Office had actually used the term settler terror. That was a success in the leveraging of the language that is being used. Like, for them to come to terms with using the term settler terror was an accomplishment, yet it was at the expense of so many sufferings of the Palestinian civilians under different crimes of the Israeli settlers. I don't think that the level of brutality and the level of uh, the criminal level of missiles and rockets and shelling and just eradicating anything civilian in Gaza will see light in the West Bank. However, what we are living in the West Bank should not be neglected. I mean, the Israeli occupation forces are invading Palestinian cities and villages on daily basis. Incursions take place in downtown Ramallah or downtown Hebron or Nablus. Jericho, the most peaceful city historically, is facing continued closures, so many checkpoints, investigations, people queue for hours. So the level of suffocation that the Palestinian civilians are enduring on daily basis between the Palestinian cities. I mean, around every Palestinian city, you will find at least 2 to 3 checkpoints where
Mhm.
people are just interrogated, searched, and are forced to wait for 2 to 3 hours in every commute. This is a suffocation for the Palestinian civilians, and this puts them under the threat of the attacks of the settler terror that they can face on the roads. And this also, it hinders our daily living. People who want to commute to their work, the commerce, the trading, the vegetables that we want to transfer, the doctors who want to go to their hospitals, the nurses who want to provide service, the teachers who need to commute to the schools, the professors, the I mean, it's really inhumane, and it's really had reached a level of apartheid that the world had not witnessed before. The West Bank is under attack on daily basis. Every civilian, every Palestinian is under attack, and Israel is targeting every Palestinian, as I said, every Palestinian city, every Palestinian camp, uh, every Palestinian land, every Palestinian tree. This is a war against the Palestinian right to self determination. Their hopes, their hopes in turning the Palestinian people into minority will not prevail, because the Palestinian people are very resilient, they're very steadfast. And what the most important thing is that the people here are aware of the Israeli attempts of committing a second Nakba against the Palestinian people. Because what we saw in Gaza is basically a practical translation of second Nakba. What do we call military orders and military invasions and rockets and missiles who are asking people to evict their homes or just be killed or die? It's basically a translation of a second Nakba, and the Palestinians are aware of that fact, are aware of that threat, and I don't think they will let it pass. We have a right
Mhm.
to self determination. We have legally, politically, economically, socially speaking. We were here and we will remain here. It was called Palestine
Mhm.
before the Israeli state was established, and this is something that everybody should remember
Mm.
on every map, and we should not accept that reality will be distorted or that the facts will be spinned. We're here to remind the world that this land was ours. We're still here, and it is not a favor that the Israelis will be doing us in granting us our rights. It is our embedded right, our solid rights that are inalienable rights for the Palestinian people in our statehood, our dignity, our independence, our freedom, and our liberation, to say the least.
So it, I mean, it feels to me at this point like we were on the back foot because what we most need and demand is a ceasefire. But dealing with a state that still doesn't admit to committing the Nakba, do you think that a political negotiation is possible with a state that still has not acknowledged the ethnic cleansing they perpetrated in order to come to being?
I am a professor of diplomacy, Adam.
Hmm.
So I teach negotiations, and I teach what we call in theory the ADRs, the alternative dispute resolution tools, the peaceful uh, tools. Negotiations is one peaceful tool to conflict resolution. Unfortunately, after 3 decades of a sugar coated peace process in the Middle East, we had reached to a point where the international community is dealing with negotiations as if it is the end in itself, as if it is our goal to go back to the negotiating table. It is my obligation and responsibility as a professor in diplomacy and conflict resolution to remind the international community who is still committed to the two-state solution that negotiations is only one tool. It is not the end in itself for any political horizon, because I believe in peaceful tools and I believe in diplomacy. I believe in legal tools. Before we speak about negotiations, I think it is time that we impose international legitimacy and international law. And this does not contradict the rationale and the thinking of the parties that are calling for the two-state solution. Because let me remind the world that the peace process, when it started, it referred to all the international, humanitarian law, UN Charter, UN resolutions 242, 338, 194. So those are not contested. So if we all agree that the Palestinians have a right to self determination, if we all agree on Article 242, 338, 194, 2334, what is stopping the international community from imposing law first and then speaking about the details? I think the negotiators or the peace process had failed in many aspects, of course, but in one major aspect that we need to reconsider is the school that focused on the details leading to the more major issues. And now I would say if we want to speak about any political future horizons, we should be speaking about dealing first with the final status issues, with the bigger picture, which means ending the Israeli military occupation. That's where we should start, with defining the border of the long recognized state of Israel. For 76 years, the world is celebrating this state every May. Yet, it is the only state in the world that doesn't have defined borders. The world had tolerated seeing Netanyahu at the UN in September holding that map with Israel from the river to the sea. So, those countries which want to still advocate for the two-state solution have two options. They either define the border, recognize the Palestinian state and the Israeli occupation, and then ask the two parties to come to the negotiating table to agree on the other details. The other option is to just refrain from this repeated rhetoric of two-state solution and accept the imposed facts on our grounds of having a one state, and unfortunately it's an apartheid state, which will not live forever as long as there are people, humans who are educated and who are active enough and vocal enough about their own human rights and their own uh, uh, rights that are embedded in the international system. So this apartheid regime will not last long, as long as there are people who are resilient and who will continue their struggle for freedom.
I agree. And thank you, Dalal.